Thanks for checking out this movie review video. So this is for the 1964 Krimi film Room 13. And if you're hearing me say the word Krimi and saying, what is Krimi? It was basically a genre of kind of like crime film with a little bit of a horror element to it from Germany. And I think it was most popular like 50s and 60s. I'm not 100% sure about that. I have to recheck my source. But basically, it was the genre that influenced Giallo. And it's interesting because you can kind of, trace this stuff back that like slashers were influenced by Giallo and Giallo was influenced by Krimi films. So it's just interesting to go down that rabbit hole. That said, I don't know how many of these I'm going to watch. This is the first one I've ever watched because it happened to be on that YouTube channel Giallo Realm. So they do throw a lot of kind of like Giallo influenced and Krimi films on there. So I just finally came across one and I was like, hey, I'll review it anyway. So I'm not sure how many of these I'm going to end up doing. But yeah. So my first Krimi film, and I will say I enjoyed it. Had a pretty good time with this one. A lot of positives for me with this. There's some negatives with it, but pretty positive experience for the most part. So let's talk about Room 13, which, by the way, the Room 13 does appear briefly in the film, and I think it's called that just because kind of that's where the crime planning goes on by Leg, the main bad guy who's, coordinating this robbery on the train, which was pretty well done and pretty fun. Anyway, Room 13 is directed by Harald Reinl, who also did some films such as The Unholy Intruders, Face of the Frog, The Terrible People, The Carpet of Horror, The Strangler of Blackfoot Castle, and The Torture Chamber of Dr. Sadism. That last title, the most enticing, I will say. This is written by Will Tremper, who also wrote scripts for Teenage Wolfpack, The Endless Night, and Mark of the Tortoise, which does sound like a Giallo-type title. And based on a book by Edgar Wallace, who has 234 writing credits on IMDb, which is pretty crazy. Apparently, exterior shots for this film were all shot in Denmark. So it's a German film, but it was shot partially in Denmark. So, that happens with films. They're not always from one country of origin. A menacing straight razor twirl to start the film. I love that. In that, I could definitely see some Giallo taking influence from a film like this, because obviously straight razors are used as killing mechanisms in Giallo films quite a bit. Also, the whole idea in this film and other Krimi films about kind of a killer that you don't know who they are until the end of the film. Now, that said, within this film in particular, I do feel like it was kind of like a subplot that there was this killer who ends up being obviously Denise at the end of the film, which I did see coming and I'll talk about why when we kind of get to that point of the film. But yeah, I figured, I kind of was hoping it would be a bigger portion of it, but maybe that's kind of how most Krimi films are, where it's kind of focused mainly on the crime, but then there's this kind of like subplot of this killer that's that little tinge of horror. And then when Giallo got inspired by it, they're kind of like, well, let's kind of flip this and let's make kind of the horror of this unknown killer be the main focus. So we'll see. And then Slasher said, well, let's take this Giallo thing and make it more mindless. Still fun though. The opening credit music is wild. It gets you pumped up with all the saxophone and trumpet in it. It's wild, it's fun, and it's upbeat, and it really does get you pumped up. It makes you feel like jazzed. You're like, okay, this is exciting. So I like it when films have that type of music because it kind of strikes you as being a little weird and kind of out of nowhere, but it's fun to listen to at the same time. So I'm down. I like the music in general in this film. Robert talking about his razor missing in the beginning makes you think that that'll end up being the murder weapon, which it is, and obviously it makes sense that Denise was the one killing by the end because she had access to it with Robert being her father and all. But it does make you think at that point, does Robert become a suspect at any juncture within the film? And he really doesn't. So, yeah. Although, do they actually find the initial straight razor? No, I don't think they actually find the initial straight razor until the very end of the film, because there's another straight razor that ends up being used in the murders. I think there's two total. But yeah. Leg is Robert's past coming back to throw a wrench in his current future plans. Obviously, they had a past. I like how they kind of like hint at they had a past, and then much later in the film is when you get the full story on why Robert is basically under Leg's thumb at that point to kind of go along with hiding the money at his place in his basement of his estate after the actual robbery occurs. So I like that crime aspect and the complication of the relationship with Robert and Leg. The voice work for the dubbing of Sir John, the police chief, hilarious. I love when you find these dubbing gems where the people just went for it. And when I say went for it, I don't mean they went for it as in like a good performance. They went for it as in like over the top ridiculousness to the nth degree. And whoever voiced Sir John for this, that is what they did. And it was great because it adds this extra funny element to it. Also, the person who voiced Dr. Higgins did the same, but I think the Sir John voice dubbing was the best by far. Really enjoyed it. Wow, good thing Gray didn't end up shooting Denise in the very beginning of the film, although if he had accidentally shot her at that point, he would have kept people from being murdered. It was a crazy moment, and then the fact that he asks her out for a date, and she says yes after he like blindly shoots at the curtain that she's standing behind and almost hits her with that bullet. Then he's just like, oh, you're good looking, you want to go out together? And she's like, oh yeah, okay. Which I think she kind of felt a little bit forced into it because Robert was hiring Gray at that point to kind of look after Denise because he thought that she might be a object of target for Leg and his crew to kind of get him under thumb. So yeah, but it's just weird that she was just like, oh yeah, you just almost killed me, but let's go out. Leg is a real criminal mastermind with an impressive operation. He does seem very large scale with him, but it does also feel weird because he literally has just gotten out of jail. He served like 20 years is what they say, and he gets out of jail and he's immediately like, we're pulling a caper, let's do this. And in room 13 is where he has his base of operations at the High-Low. That's what the burlesque club is called, the High-Low, which looked like a fun club for the most part. But he, room 13 is where he kind of plans all this out, and he's got, I mean, it looks like he's fully set up and running with all this stuff. It's pretty interesting. It seems to me that Gray is more interested in checking out the burlesque dancer at the High-Low than he is at protecting Denise. Because at that point, he's employed by Robert, what was his last name? Robert Marnie. He's employed to be watching Denise, but he's so focused on the burlesque dancer, and then he goes to like try and find the burlesque dancer and just leaves Denise, which obviously they needed that in order to progress the story so people so she would have the opportunity to do the killing because Gray is away, but it would also seem like the focus is on him, not on her. Not that like she got up and went somewhere, so there's no suspicion there on her, which, you know, was smart in my opinion. So the first person to die, Wanda, the burlesque dancer, her death looked pretty cool. I loved the kind of blood splatter that they had on that kind of like wooden slatted thing. I forget what those are called. Someone can correct me, you know, or let me know down in the comments, but that like splatter of blood with that, and then the camera like pans up and shows the crowd of people as they start reacting to the fact that she's been killed and then start rushing to, you know, take care of things or mitigate the situation. But really well shot. That leads me to the other thing, which is directing, quite good for this film. Cinematography, also quite good. It looked good, and there's a lot of interesting camera movement, a lot of decent zooming, which Giallo Films ended up doing a lot of zooming, but some of them did it like in a very severe way where it's like really rough, and it feels like you're getting whiplash from it. This, very smooth and slight at times. Even when it's more significant, it's still like relatively slow and smooth. So I like the way they handled the visuals of this. The official underwear of Scotland Yard. I like that aspect because that's when the police show up and they're like, oh, Wanda was working for us. And he's like, oh, yes, I know, because this is her underwear and it's the official underwear of Scotland Yard. I don't know if that was supposed to be a joke from that character or if it was just him speaking plainly and actually saying that there is official underwear of Scotland Yard. I just thought that was kind of funny. It's one of those lines that just like strikes you as like, what? Okay, but it's funny. I like it. So Ambrose the butler acts suspicious when Gray runs into him behind the stage at the high-low. Now that, I believe, is a red herring moment where they're trying to shift maybe a little bit of focus onto Ambrose, and he's protecting Denise at that point, who's hiding, which makes you not have any suspicion towards her. But there are certain things, like kind of more subtle things, although maybe they could have made them even more subtle, that do make you suspect her, which I will be talking about in a little bit. Denise, right here actually, Denise staring at the painting of her mother is creepy. Plus they play some odd music that ends up enhancing that moment, and that's one of those moments where you start to think there's something going on here, either with Denise, with something that happened with her mother, or both. And in the end you find out, yes, it was both, because Denise's mother had been the mistress of Leg while she's married to Robert, and then Robert finds out about it, and then Denise's mother ended up killing herself, and then that traumatic moment, because Denise saw her mother kill herself with a straight razor, that traumatic moment is what kind of touches things off for Denise and makes her want to murder other women. So yeah, very significant. Dr. Higgins is a wacky character. Like I said, the dubbing did a lot for making him a wacky character, but he's also just very left field. Like, why do we have this random scientist in the film? Like, I understand the idea that maybe they just wanted to have like his bulletproof vest gag in there, and the weird obsession that he has with this mannequin that ends up getting its throat slit later on. But there's just like a lot of like weird quirky type things, which that's another thing that happens in Giallo films as well. So I don't know if that was particularly picked out from Krimi films to be moved over to Giallo, but I like those kind of like weird quirky things in these films. Lewis sure was easy to get out of the way. You just throw him a bottle of booze. That was the guy who was working at the train yard when they're setting up this caper to rob the train. And he's literally working, and some dude's like, hey, I got some booze for you. And he's like, oh, sweet. Catches the booze that he throws to him and just takes off, as the guy says, to have a nip of it. He's going to get drunk. But I just thought that was funny, where it was that easy to get rid of the one person who could have stood in their way of this caper. Although he didn't look physically like he was going to stand in their way of it, to be honest. Like, he wasn't going to put up much of a fight. As soon as Denise seemed fixated on the straight razor that she sees at the high-low, I suspected she was the killer, especially because Pia then ends up showing up dead. Like, they literally had that scene where, like, she goes into that one room and she, like, fixates on the straight razor. Like, they show her face with, like, staring, and then they show the straight razor, and I'm like, oh, there's something very significant here. And then we find out, like, literally seconds later that Pia has been murdered, and it's in the same manner as Wanda. So I was like, okay, this has got to be Denise at this point. Iggy got messed up, and I like how he tells Sir John that he ended up falling down the stairs. Iggy was the kind of shorter gentleman who was working at the high-low, who Leg was really bullying, and who was kind of taking a lot of the blame initially for the murders. If you remember, he was kind of hauled into the police station and questioned, and then eventually let go. And then he got a beat down from Leg and his crew. And then he just tells the police chief, oh, I fell down the stairs. He was a twitchy character. I like the touch of Denise getting gassed in the back of the car. That was interesting. When she gets abducted, but she thinks she's going with a police officer, and they kind of like close the partition between the front and back seats, and then he hits, I think it was hits a button or like flicks a switch, and you see like the gas coming out of the floor to knock her out, so that she can be abducted by Leg, and he can hold her so that he can put the pressure on Robert to say, hey, we're bringing the goods to your house and hiding them there. Otherwise, your daughter gets it. This planning between Gray and Higgins is very wacky, and I was all about it. Another one of those wacky, weird, fun moments of the film where Gray, for some reason, is friends with Higgins and goes there to be like, hey, join me in this operation. We're going to go save Denise. And then he comes up with this idea, I'll bring this new bulletproof vest that I've been working on that looks very cumbersome. Very, very cumbersome. And he gets to use it, so good for him. He field tested it, I think he says. I knew that dude Slim would end up drinking the drink that Iggy gave him that was supposed to be for Denise to knock her out. Because you see the way he looks at it when it comes up to dumbwaiter, which, by the way, dumbwaiters are cool. They always were cool, and they still are cool. I like the idea of dumbwaiters. He gets the drink, and just like the first glance he takes at the drink, you're just like, this guy's going to drink it. Drinks it, falls asleep, gives the opportunity for Denise to get out of there, and then the film progresses. What is with the vault door in room 13, though? It looks like it's one of those vault doors that like you have to like put in the combination, turn that big wheel, and then pull it outward. But then you see that leg comes out from the room that it's, in front of. And instead of like opening, it's just like a sliding panel. It's like a false feature. I'm like, why would you make this a false feature? I don't know if that was kind of like a screw up with the making of the film, or if it was supposed to be like that for some odd reason. I don't really understand that. That was a very weird head scratcher of a moment in the film for me. I was just like, I don't understand this. So, Leg's plan is to have Sir John with him when the robbery goes down as an alibi. Guess he assumes that Sir John wouldn't suspect that he planned things. That's the thing, is that like he just assumes, he's like, because I'm not physically doing it, they will then assume that I have nothing to do with it. He even makes some comments, though, like hinting at the fact that there's something that's going to go on with a train around a certain time. So, like, that would cast more suspicion on you, Leg. So it's kind of this weird thing. I guess maybe it was he had just such a big ego that he was like, oh, he'll just never catch me. Although, is that warranted? Because he just served 20 years for a robbery. I don't know. Maybe it's just his character's personality. I don't know. I guess there's no thought given to getting Pia's body out of the sewer. I like that moment when, like, I think it's Gray and Denise go down into the sewer, like, right outside of High-Low, and they find Pia's body having been disposed of there, because there's a comment earlier that someone was like, oh, Pia's been murdered, and they go there like, there was no body, and then we're finding it in the sewer, and they're concerned about, using the dynamite that Higgins brought for some reason to blow open the grate in the sewer so they can get further through the sewer, but they see Pia's body and they're just like, there's a body. And then they just keep going. And as far as we know, Pia's body's still there. Disrespectful. Not a bad idea on Leg's part to try and hide the money in Robert's basement. That was a smart idea because Robert, you get the idea through some of the dialogue that he actually has like a position of power within the government in the country. So he's wouldn't easily be suspected unless people know about his past with Leg, but through conversations between Robert and Leg, it seems like people don't know about how they were tied together before. I didn't see a huge gunfight breaking out in this, but it happens, and it's fun, and the fact that Higgins throws dynamite, so he had more than one bundle of dynamite with him, because he blows the grate in the sewer, and then he throws dynamite at that truck amidst this big gunfight, and it's just like, it was a crazy gunfight. It was pretty large scale, and I was impressed with it. I didn't see it coming, but it was fun. It was a nice little addition to the film, and I really enjoyed that. Just up the fun. There was a lot of fun to be had in this film. Denise was insane because of witnessing her mother kill herself with a straight razor. Yes, that's pointed to as the moan of psychosis, basically, for her future life. And you find that a lot with these types of films, at least with like Giallo that I'm familiar with, and a bunch of horror films that have killers, is they focus in on this one like singular moment that creates the trauma that will later in life inform the killing moments of these individuals. So it's certainly done here. Already talked about the directing. There are a lot of shots of Denise's eyes. Notice that, and I think that it's kind of supposed to show that there's something going on in her brain, that something's a little bit off, kind of giving you a bit of a signal that there's more to her, that there's something behind her eyes. There's something more to her. Because what do they say? Like, the eyes are the window to the soul, in essence. And why are we focusing on her eyes? To show you that you should be able to see through this window because there's something behind it. And we find out it's something sinister behind it. The film's pretty fast-paced. It's like an hour, 25 minutes, I think, and it moves. Like, it moves. Well edited, well shot, well acted. Music is really good. Some good action, some good pacing. It's a fun film. But once again, this is mainly like a crime caper film with kind of a serial killer subplot. So I wouldn't really necessarily call this a horror film. I really wouldn't call this a horror film. But does it have a horror element to it? Yes. It has a small horror element, but that's, common. There are a lot of films that have at least a small horror element to them. So I'm not 100% out of my realm putting this review on my channel because I pretty much only do horror. But I've been going down this road of giallo and now a little bit creamy, but that's going to happen from time to time. Anyway, I would love to know everyone else's feelings on this film, Room 13. Go ahead and put some comments down there. And also, if you want me to continue with doing some creamy films here and there, are there ones that you know of that you highly recommend and that I should definitely check out and do reviews on? Let me know. So out of 5 stars with half stars in play, for this film in particular, I'm going to give it a pretty solid 3.5 star rating. I did enjoy it, mainly because of all the fun and the wackiness to it. Pretty solid. And yeah, I mean, for being my first creamy film, it's a good introduction for me being excited about the genre, to be honest. So, like I said, put some comments down here, your thoughts on this film, or just talking about creamy or giallo films, or whatever in general, we can do that. Also, hit subscribe if you have not already. If you have, you are amazing, and thank you very much. If you haven't, it is quick, painless, costs you no money, and it truly does motivate me to keep this going. When I'm doing this video right now, I'm not making any money doing this. It's just a hobby. I'm just trying to build a nerdy horror community here so I can talk to, I was going to say like-minded people, but I don't necessarily want to talk with like-minded. Like, that's fine, but I also want to hear other opinions about horror stuff. I just like getting nerdy about horror, and where I live, I can't really get that level of conversation with horror with people, except like one person, my best friend Rich. So it's like, I'm reaching out to you guys. So comments, subscribes, also hit the notification bell button because you'll know when I'm putting up videos, which I'm doing about 4 a week, so that's pretty solid. But yeah, regardless, I really do thank you for taking your time to watch this video, and until next time, keep it brutal.